I was stalked and sexually assaulted in my UofT residence. When I talked to the registrar's office about it, they blamed me for letting the guy know where I live. They wouldn't let me move and basically told me there was nothing I could do unless I wanted to get my own place and move out, but that I would not get refunded my residence costs.
I was stalked and harassed by another student on the same floor in my building. They left poems under my door after aggressively banging on my door at 3 a.m. I went to the residence life office for help. They went to talk to him and essentially said, "Did you do this? Because if you did, you shouldn't do things like that." And he just said, "I didn't do it," so they left. They made me move to a different floor during exam season instead of forcing him to move. I had to have a male friend walk me to the dining hall for the entire rest of the year.
I was sexually assaulted in my room in Trinity College residence. When I reported it and was seeking help, I was basically told the assault was my fault since I let him in the room.
I was living in UofT residence in my second year. I invited a classmate from one of my required classes over. We started to hook up, and that was all fine, until he got aggressive. The more I tried to push him off of me, the harder he pushed down. I couldn't breathe and I blacked out. He also had his hands on my neck, so I really couldn't breathe. I had fully accepted I was going to die, and there was no way I would be able to fight this off. All but maybe 3 of my roommates were home. Nobody heard anything, and I never reported it because he was graduating and I wouldn't ever see his face again. I ended up having to late withdrawal the course, overload, take an equivalent next year, and dealt with the PTSD on my own. I went to class the next day like nothing happened. I didn't even want to live in the same residence next year or the year after. It took a couple of years and a lot for me to realize that blacking out during sex isn't supposed to happen, and I still sometimes think it's my fault because I invited the guy over.
UofT residence is so violently transphobic and inaccessible. It is not a safe space. I regret living here. Your best bet to survive is to pretend to be cisgendered.
I worked as a residence Don at UofT, and it became so clear they do not care about their students. Dons are given no proper training other than call the cops on how to support students. Sexual violence was rampant in the residence when I was a Don, between students, but also Dons harming their students, and predators being hired as Dons. It was terrifying to see how many students on my floor were harmed and how little the residents cared. They were absolutely complicit in the rape culture in the residence.
I lived in Harmony Commons. It was my first time living alone, and I had already been a previous victim of SV. I would go down to eat with baggy clothes to prevent unwanted comments, which I shouldn't have to do in the first place. I had gotten sick and I was too tired to change out of my shorts. A guy I had never met nor ever spoken to once in my life sexually harassed me, talking about my thighs, commenting about my scars related to a traumatic car accident earlier that year, and self-harm scars. I felt like my body was being analyzed, and I couldn't believe I was being spoken to in this way despite not being new to this type of harassment. I've also had my behind gripped and slapped by some guy when I went down to eat. I've had people make sexual remarks in my DMs, online, and in person about my wheelchair and about me. I felt at risk for another assault. I felt like an object, and I didn't even feel safe in my mobility device meant to make me more comfortable.
They genuinely don't care if you live or die in residence. The number of suicides in residence they've covered up proves that.
There is so much victim blaming. After I was sexually assaulted in UofT residence, I was told it's my fault for letting him know where my room was, for not locking my door, and interrogated about whether or not I let him into the building with my keys. For UofT residents to basically tell me that it's my fault I was sexually assaulted because I didn't lock my door and because I didn't hide where I live is so messed up.
In one of the years at my residence, a resident got kidnapped close to campus and held for ransom over the course of one night. I was only informed by other floor mates that were directly involved. There was no communication from the residents about this except for a vague email about fraud prevention. All of a sudden, there were additional security at the residence, a counselor on site, and grief circles. All of us were really confused and left in the dark, not knowing if we were safe or not, or if there was a threat outside or not.
3 students at my residence died by suicide in 2020. Only one death was ever acknowledged. The RAs said that they weren't allowed to talk about the other incident.
I was sexually assaulted in my dorm room in my first year in Trinity College. When I reported it to the Sexual Prevention Center, they basically told me it was my fault because I let him into the quad, my building, and then my room, since all the doors are locked to non-residence people. Then they told me they couldn't really do anything to help me because he went to TMU and not UofT.